Wanted to leave before the appetizers came out. That was the thought running through my head as I stood in the doorway of that restaurant, some place with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a menu I needed reading glasses to decipher. My son had made the reservation. He'd told me to dress nice. I wore the blue button-down I'd bought for his mother's funeral 3 years ago, and I thought about that the whole drive over. She would have known something was wrong. She always did. I'm not a man who makes excuses for himself. I spent 31 years working maintenance at the county hospital in Harlan County, Kentucky. I got up at 4:30 every morning, drove 40 minutes in the dark, and I fixed things. Boilers, HVAC units, electrical panels that hadn't been touched since the Carter administration. When something broke, they called me, not because I was the smartest man in the building, but because I showed up and I did not quit until it was right. My wife, Helen, used to say I was the most patient man God ever made. I think she meant it as a compliment most of the time. After she died, a stroke, fast, merciful in its own terrible way, it was just me and our son Luke. He was 27 then. He lived 2 hours away in Lexington, working in logistics for a distribution company. We talked on the phone every Sunday. He came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas and sometimes just a random weekend in March, when I think he could tell I needed the company without either of us having to say so. That was my son. That was the boy I knew. And then, 14 months before that dinner, he met Vanessa. I heard it in his voice the first time he mentioned her name. A certain brightness. I'd heard that same brightness 35 years earlier when he was 2 years old and discovered that dogs existed. Pure, uncomplicated joy. I was happy for him. I was genuinely, completely happy for him. I met her 6 weeks later when Luke drove home and brought her with him. She was pretty in the way that makes you aware of it, like she knew exactly how she entered a room. Dark hair, careful makeup, the kind of clothes that don't look expensive until you think about it later. She worked in commercial real estate in Lexington. Her father, she mentioned 3 times in the first hour, owned several properties across central Kentucky. She shook my hand when they arrived. Firm grip. Direct eye contact. "Luke has told me so much about you, Mr. Slade," she said. "I don't know why that bothered me. People say that all the time. It's just something people say. But something sat crooked in my chest the rest of that weekend, and I couldn't level it out no matter how hard I tried." Luke called me the following Sunday, same as always. He asked what I thought of her. I told him she seemed like a sharp young woman. He laughed a little and said she really was. I asked him how serious it was. He got quiet in the way he used to get quiet when he was 16, and I asked him questions he didn't know how to answer yet. "Pretty serious, Dad," he said. "I think she might be the one." I said good. I said I was glad he was happy. I meant both of those things. The engagement dinner was at a restaurant called Provision, which I later found out ran $80 a plate before drinks. Her parents chose it. Her father, his name was Mitchell, though he introduced himself as Mitch only once before apparently deciding that Mr. Hale would do just fine, worked in commercial property development. Her mother, Sandra, had the particular energy of a woman who has spent decades being charming in rooms where it was required of her. They were seated when I arrived. Luke stood up and hugged me. Vanessa smiled from her chair. Mitch Hale looked at me the way a man looks at a car in a lot he's already decided not to buy. I'd driven up from Harlan that afternoon. 4.5 hours construction on the Mountain Parkway, so I was 20 minutes later than I'd planned. I apologized for that. My work boots were in the truck. I'd changed into clean shoes before I walked in, but I still had the smell of the drive on me, probably. The particular smell of a man who lives alone in a house with a wood stove and doesn't always notice what he's gotten used to. I was sitting down and reaching for the water glass when I heard it. Vanessa leaned toward her mother. Just slightly. Just enough. And I caught it because the restaurant was loud and sound does strange things in rooms like that. "The old coal miner finally made it," she said. She said it like it was nothing, like she was commenting on the weather. Her mother pressed her lips together in a small smile and said nothing. Luke was looking at his menu. I don't know if he heard. I set my water glass back down without drinking from it, and I looked at the breadbasket in the center of the table, and I thought about Helen, and I thought about 4:30 in the morning, and I thought about 31 years of keeping a hospital running so that people could live through things that should have killed them, and I thought about how I'd worn the nicest shirt I owned. I put my napkin in my lap. I ordered the smallest thing on the menu. I answered questions when I was asked them, and I asked a few myself, and I made it through to dessert, which I declined, and I said the food was very good and the place was lovely, and when Mitch Hale asked what I planned to do with myself in retirement, I said I kept busy and let it sit there. Then Luke walked me out to my truck. The night was cold, early December, the kind of cold that has weight to it. We stood by the driver's side door, and I was already reaching for my keys when Luke put his hand on my arm. Not my shoulder. My arm, the way he used to when he was small and trying to get my attention in a crowd. I stopped. He looked at me for a long moment. His face in the parking lot light was the same face he'd had at 8 years old, and at 14, and at 22 when I handed him the keys to my old truck and told him to drive safe. I know every version of that face. Dad, he said, and then he paused. Don't give up on me yet. That was all. He squeezed my arm once, let go, and walked back inside. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time before I started the engine. What did he know that I didn't? I asked myself that question for 11 months. I went home to Harlan. I called him on Sundays. We talked about the usual things, his job, my vegetable garden, the gutters I needed to replace before spring, the Tennessee game. Vanessa's name came up naturally, and I responded naturally. They were planning a June wedding. They found a venue. Her parents were handling most of the arrangements. Luke seemed settled about it, not nervous, not strained. Just settled. I watched for something. I didn't know what I was watching for. In February, he called me on a Wednesday, not Sunday, and asked if I'd had a will drawn up. I told him yes. Helen and I had done that years ago, but I'd updated it after she passed. He said good, that was good. He just wanted to make sure. I asked him if everything was all right. He said everything was fine. In March, Vanessa called me directly. She'd never done that before. She was warm and friendly and asked if I'd ever thought about whether I might sell the house eventually. Not now, just eventually, because the property market in Harlan County was doing some interesting things and her father had contacts who might be able to help me get a good price. I said I hadn't thought about it. She said, of course, just something to keep in mind. I sat with that phone call for a long time. Then in April, Luke drove down for a weekend alone, no Vanessa, and we worked on the back fence together, the section along the property line that had been listing for 2 years. We worked most of Saturday without saying much, which was fine. That was always fine with us. Saturday evening we sat on the back porch and he handed me a beer and I waited. I need you to trust me on something, he said, without me explaining all of it. I looked at the tree line. 2 deer at the edge of the yard, just standing there in the last light. Helen always loved when the deer came. All right, I said. I know what I'm doing, he said. I just need you to not do anything. Don't sell anything, don't sign anything, don't change anything about the will or the house. And if anyone asks you about any of it, tell them you haven't decided yet. Anyone, I said. Anyone, he said. I took a long drink of my beer. You going to tell me what's going on with this girl? I asked. He looked at the deer. Not yet. Soon. I need a little more time. I nodded. I said okay. He stayed through Sunday, helped me get the fence posts set in concrete, ate the chicken I made that evening, and drove back to Lexington. I didn't ask again. He'd asked me to trust him. I trusted him. I trusted him. The reunion came around. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday evening at the Hale family home. a large colonial in a suburb east of Lexington, the kind of house with a circular driveway and landscaping that required professional attention. I arrived in my good truck, the one I keep clean. I wore the charcoal jacket I'd bought the previous Christmas, dress trousers, shoes that were polished. Mitch Hale met me at the door with a handshake and a smile that didn't quite connect to his eyes. He asked about the drive. I said it was fine. He said wonderful. He walked me into the living room and went somewhere else. There were maybe 40 people, I knew none of them. Luke found me within a few minutes and brought me a drink and stayed close for a while, introducing me to people, friends of his, a couple of his work colleagues, a cousin he liked. Vanessa moved through the room with the ease of someone at her own party, which she was, touching elbows, laughing at the right moments, managing the room the way her father managed properties. Late in the evening, after dinner, I was standing near the back windows with Luke's friend Oliver, who I'd met once before, and we were talking about nothing much when I saw Mitch Hale and Vanessa having a quiet conversation in the hallway. They didn't see me. The angle was wrong for them. Mitch had his hand on her arm. The same gesture, I noticed, that Luke had used with me in that parking lot 7 months earlier. But the expression on his face was not the expression of a father being reassuring. It was the expression of a man reviewing a plan. I watched Vanessa nod. I watched her straighten up. I watched her look across the room toward Luke with an expression that I can only describe as assessing. I turned back to Oliver and kept talking. That night I lay in the guest room. They'd offered to put me up, save me the drive. And I stared at the ceiling and I thought about the word my son had used. Trust me. The wedding was at 11 the next morning. I got dressed in that guest room. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. 63 years old, grey at the temples, hands that had fixed about everything that could be fixed. Helen's face came to me the way it always did at the important moments. She would have known. She would have told me too. I went downstairs and found the house already full of activity. Caterers, florists, family members who'd stayed over, Sandra Hale moving through it all with a clipboard. Vanessa was upstairs, presumably doing whatever brides do in those hours. Luke was in the kitchen, suit jacket on, tie not yet knotted, drinking coffee at the counter. When he saw me, he smiled. Not the strained smile of a groom having doubts. Calm. Purposeful. The smile of a man who knows something no one else in the room knows yet. He poured me a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Today's the day, he said. It is, I said. He looked at me over his mug. You trust me, Dad. I looked back at him. I always have. He nodded once. We drank our coffee. The ceremony was at a venue 20 minutes away, a restored barn on a farm property outside Lexington. It was genuinely beautiful, I'll give them that. White flowers everywhere, string lights, the kind of setting that photographs well, which I expect was part of the calculation. I sat in the front row on the groom's side. Mitch Hale, 3 seats down, caught my eye and nodded in a way that felt like a man checking a box. The officiant started. Luke stood at the front and watched Vanessa walk up the aisle on her father's arm, and his face was composed and attentive. He helped her up the 2 steps. The officiant said the usual things about commitment and partnership and 2 lives becoming one. Then he got to the vows, and Vanessa said, and I remember this exactly because I have replayed it many times, I do. And Luke said, I'm sorry, I can't. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Vanessa's smile didn't fall. It stayed on her face for 2 full seconds while her brain caught up to what her ears had heard. Then it fell. What? She said. Luke reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded document. He handed it to the officiant, who looked deeply out of his depth and took it anyway. Luke turned to address the room. He was so calm. He was so completely calm. I want to apologize to everyone here for the disruption, he said. This wasn't my first choice, but I couldn't get to this moment any other way without tipping my hand. He looked at Vanessa. I know about the meetings with your father's attorney. I know about the plan to establish power of attorney over my father's property within the first year of our marriage. I know you never intended this to last. He looked at Mitch Hale. "And I know about the Claremont Road parcel, and what you were counting on getting access to when the highway expansion comes through." The room had become very still. I had not known about the highway expansion. Mitch Hale stood up from his seat. "That is an outrageous— I have documentation," Luke said. It was not a shout. It was just a fact, stated flatly, the way a maintenance man states a fact about a broken system. "My attorney has copies. The county clerk's office also has copies filed this past Thursday." Sandra Hale made a sound I can't describe. Vanessa said his name, just his name. "I'm sorry," Luke said again. He sounded like he meant it. Not for this, for the fact that it had to happen at all. He stepped down from the platform and walked up the aisle, past 200 people who had gone completely silent, and when he got to my row, he stopped and held out his hand. I took it. We walked out of that barn together. We sat in my truck in the parking area for a long time. He'd loosened his tie. The May sun was coming through the windshield. He told me everything then. How he'd noticed small things in the first few months, questions about my finances, my property, my health, whether I had a doctor I saw regularly. How often we talked. He'd noticed how those questions always found their way back to assets. He'd noticed how Vanessa deferred to her father in ways that weren't about love or respect but about planning. He'd hired a private investigator in January. He didn't tell me because he didn't want me to carry it, and because he needed me to behave naturally around them. The investigator had found correspondence, emails, which people are careless about, between Vanessa and her father outlining the plan. The property my parents had lived on for 35 years sat in a corridor that the state was quietly considering for a highway bypass. It had been informally appraised. The value was significant. The plan had been to maneuver a vulnerable older man— that was the phrase from the emails, a vulnerable older man— into a situation where his daughter-in-law could establish financial oversight. My son had known all of this since February. "Why didn't you just call it off?" I asked. "Why go through all of this?" He looked out through the windshield. "Because if I'd just broken it off quietly, they would have found another way," he said. "Another target. I needed it on record. I needed witnesses. I needed it to be undeniable." He paused. "And maybe," he said quietly, "I needed them to feel what it felt like to have something pulled out from under them when they thought they had it locked down." I didn't say anything. I thought about a parking lot in December, about a hand on my arm, about "don't give up on me yet." "I heard what she said at the engagement dinner," I said. "The old coal miner." He was quiet for a moment. "So did I," he said. "The attorney fees came to more than I wanted to think about, and I told Luke that was my debt to carry, not his. And we argued about it the way we argue, not loudly, just stubbornly, and eventually settled on splitting it down the middle. He didn't want me to pay any of it. I didn't want him to pay all of it. We compromised. Mitch Hale's plans for the highway corridor parcel went nowhere. There is, it turns out, a considerable difference between property you own and property you were counting on acquiring through a marriage that dissolved publicly in front of 200 people and was filed in county court records. His attorney must have explained this to him at some point. The highway expansion, when it eventually gets built, and it will get built, eventually these things always do, will not be Mitch Hale's windfall. I don't know what happened to Vanessa after that day. I've not asked, and Luke has not volunteered it, and I think that's the right arrangement for both of us. Luke took some time off work. He came back to Harlan for 3 weeks that summer, which was the longest stretch he'd stayed since high school. We fixed the rest of the back fence. We repainted the kitchen. He found a leak in the roof over the back bedroom that I'd been ignoring, and he fixed it properly. Not the way I'd been patching it, but the right way, with new flashing and everything sealed correctly. Helen would have liked seeing us do that. She liked it when things were fixed right. One evening we were sitting on the back porch, same 2 chairs we'd sat in when he'd asked me to trust him. The summer was gone from the air by then. The tree line was turning. He had a beer and I had coffee because I've started sleeping worse and the coffee doesn't help, but I drink it anyway. "I keep thinking about something," he said. What's that? You didn't ask me anything. All those months. He looked at his beer. I told you almost nothing and asked you to just sit with it. And you did. I thought about how to answer that. You're your mother's son, I said finally. She used to say that if you give a good person enough room and enough time, they'll usually find their way to the right thing. I never had any reason to stop believing that about you. He didn't say anything for a while. The deer came back, 2 of them, same spot at the edge of the yard. They stood there a moment, then moved on into the trees. I want to say something, Luke said, and I need you to just hear it. Okay. You spent 31 years keeping that hospital running. Middle of the night, whatever was broken. You never made it seem like it was anything but what you were supposed to do. He paused. I know people didn't always. I know it wasn't always. He stopped, started again. Nobody's going to talk about you that way in front of me, he said. Nobody. I looked at the tree line where the deer had gone. I thought about the blue button-down shirt and the Edison bulbs and the breadbasket I hadn't touched. I thought about sitting in my truck in a parking lot in December, not starting the engine for a long time. I know, I said. I know that, son. We sat there until it was too dark to see the yard. There are things you spend a lifetime building, not properties, not parcels, not anything that can be appraised or filed with a county clerk. The things I mean don't have titles or deeds. They get built slowly, through early mornings and kept promises and showing up when it would be easier not to, through saying I trust you and meaning it, through watching a boy become a man who does the right thing the hard way because he can't figure out how to live with himself otherwise. I spent 31 years fixing broken things. My son turned out just fine. I've been thinking about what I would say if someone asked me what I learned from all of this. Not the legal parts, not the documentation, not the county clerk filings. The real part. The part underneath all of it. Here's what I keep coming back to. Vanessa and her father didn't fail because they got unlucky. They failed because of what they were. Not who, what. There is a kind of thinking that treats other people as instruments, as resources to be positioned, assessed, and used. Mitch Hale looked at my property the way he looked at every parcel he'd ever acquired, as something to be converted into a number. Vanessa looked at my son the same way, at me the same way, and when you build a plan on that foundation, on the idea that people are just pieces to be moved, you make a particular kind of mistake. You stop watching them. You stop accounting for the fact that they're thinking too. They never once considered that Luke was paying attention. That's what undid them. I spent 31 years in a job where the work was invisible until something stopped working. Nobody called me to say the boiler was running fine. Nobody sent a note to thank me when the ventilation held through a July heat wave. The work I did existed mostly in the absence of catastrophe, and that is a strange thing to build a life on. But here is what that work taught me. A system holds because of everything that went into building it right, not because of luck. When something fails, it fails for a reason, and when you go looking for that reason honestly, without flinching, you find it. What Vanessa and Mitch built was never going to hold, not because the universe was watching and keeping score. I don't believe in that kind of accounting, but because what they built was structurally unsound from the first day. They needed Luke to be unobservant. They needed me to be desperate or lonely enough to act against my own interests. They needed everyone around them to be less than they actually were. That's a bad foundation. That's the kind of load-bearing assumption that fails under pressure. Luke was observant. I was neither desperate nor a fool. And so it failed. I think about the night he came down and we fixed the back fence together, and he asked me to trust him. He didn't explain. He didn't make promises. He just asked, and I gave him that. Not because I had no doubts, but because 30 years of watching a person teaches you something about the shape of their character. I knew the shape of his. I trusted what I knew. That is the thing I'd want anyone to carry away from this if they're carrying anything at all. Not the revenge part. That's satisfying to hear about, I understand that. I felt it too. But the longer lesson is this: the people who do you harm are rarely as clever as they believe themselves to be. They're counting on you to be smaller than you are. And the people who love you, the real ones, are often working harder on your behalf than you'll ever know, in ways you can't see, asking only that you hold on a little longer and trust them a little more. My son did that for me. He asks nothing except patience, and I gave it to him, and he gave me everything back. I fixed broken things for 31 years. Turns out so did he. He just used different tools.